This is where the infancy narratives come from. The infancy narratives are about this. How a lowlife like Mary and Joseph or Nazareth produced a great one.
Because they are all in society, so they have to come up with a story.
Absolutely. This is precise. Go ahead.
Is he still a peasant?
Huh?
Coming from, is he a peasant?
Jesus is a peasant. Absolutely, he's a peasant.
Or ancestor?
Even if he had a great ancestor, everything was lost. But Matthew, it was expected that the Messiah was a son of David. The promises that were given to Abraham will be fulfilled. Jesus is the Messiah in Matthew's understanding. He's the risen one. So we explain that through the infancy narrative. And this is precisely the problem that Jesus faces in the rest of the gospel storyline, correct? Judean leaders reject Jesus' kingship. Everybody, the scribes and the Pharisees reject Jesus. Why? Because who the hell does this man get? Where does he get all this? He's a construction worker. Matthew promotes Jesus' claim to Judean royal lineage in his list of Jesus' ancestors. Moreover, the story of Jesus' birth, which follows the genealogy, indicates divine parentage by a marvelous birth. In the literature of Mediterranean antiquity, dual paternity, meaning you have a human father and you have a divine father, was an established way of expressing marvelous birth, kingly authority, and divine power. For example, Augustus Caesar was reputed to be both the son of Octavius, the human being, and the god Apollo. Thus, kin groups provided one form of legitimation. The presence of Joseph in the lineage establishes, in Matthew's thinking, Jesus' political right to the throne of David and his social status. But divine procreation provides another legitimation. This is going to be a great leader since he was divinely given ascribed honor. This is my beloved son. Listen to him. Genealogies in the ancient world served many different purposes and were frequently rewritten to suit that purpose. The genealogy in Matthew opens his gospel and affirms Jesus' identity as a son of David and a son of Abraham in Matthew chapter 1, verses 1 to 17. The genealogy of Luke is located immediately after the voice from Sky Vault claims that Jesus is beloved and pleasing son in Luke chapter 3, verses 23 to 38. Like an echo of the voice from the sky, every entry into Luke's genealogy repeats the phrase son of, as if to emphasize the divine testimony about Jesus. And unlike Matthew's genealogy, which only goes back to Abraham, Luke's genealogy goes all the way back to Adam and to God.
So they agree on something.
Huh?
They both agree on something.
They do agree that Jesus is Messiah. They agree that Jesus has Davidic descent. They agree that Jesus is born in Bethlehem. They agree on a lot of those things, but there's a whole lot they disagree on too.
Do you think this was written because by the time from Jesus' death until this gospel was written is because the people lost interest?
No, not at all. Not at all. Not at all. They were written to explain why even people in their communities would scoff and say, but if he was a peasant, why would he be made Lord?
So it was written for them to accept him.
They already accepted him. But it's written to explain that it's not against reason that God would make him Messiah. This was not written, none of these texts were written for outsiders. They're not arguing with people outside the community. That happens later on in church history. 2nd century, 3rd century. This is 1st century when these documents were written. They're addressing problems that the people have inside. We believe, but he's a peasant?
So that's
How does that make sense?
That's why they wrote the genealogy they wrote.
And what did I say? Genealogies in the ancient world are always drawn up when? After a person dies and dies? If you don't become famous after you die, do you get a genealogy? No. You get forgotten is what you get. That's what you get. Did Jesus get forgotten? No. Something happened.
He resurrected.
He appeared before them and regularly and routinely and communicated that he's with God and very honored by God. Remember, they have to interpret in terms of their culture. Honor. That's why we still say glory. That's honor language from the Mediterranean. In the final phrases, Jesus is identified in Luke's genealogy as son of Adam, son of God. This is exactly what the voice from the sky said at Jesus' baptism. This is my beloved son. Listen to him. Why should I listen to some lowlife Nazarene? Because he's the son of God. Well, that claim is beyond dispute. And again, a main reason for writing a genealogy is to document and validate one's social status, one's honor rating. Genealogies in antiquity, folks, were regularly rewritten to make this point, as the two different and impossible to reconcile genealogies from Matthew and Luke demonstrate. No matter what specific nuance each evangelist intended to make, both were definitely concerned with presenting Jesus as an honorable person, Rose. That's why they were written. And there's other problems that we could cite. In particular, in references to the thesis that Luke gives Mary's reminiscences of the events, one has not only the general problem of historicity. Well, in Luke, there was no census. Remember, we just talked about that. That's Luke. Luke describes a census. Well, that was wrong. So if we're going to take Luke as the historically accurate document, we got problems. But the seemingly inaccurate description of the customs and behaviors of Mary when she brings the child to Jerusalem. Let me show you what I mean. Luke chapter 2, verse 22 to 24. When the days were completed for their purification, according to the law of Moses, they took him, Jesus, the baby, up to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord, just as it is written in the law of the Lord. Every male that opens the womb shall be consecrated to the Lord, and to offer the sacrifice of, quote, a pair of turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, in accordance with the dictate in the law of the Lord. We're going to talk more about those pigeons later on in the weeks to come. In Luke chapter 2, verse 22 and following, the Judean laws for the presentation of the firstborn and the purification of the mother, Luke doesn't really get Judean custom right. He confusedly describes this. And there's a wrong supposition that seems to be made that more than Mary needed to be purified. Their purification. What would that mean? Mary and Jesus? Or Mary and Joseph? Luke is an Israelite, but he's an Israelite living in a faraway foreign city, and he's been centuries in his ancestry removed from Judean custom. He doesn't understand the Judean customs, so he gets a lot of things wrong. This does not give the appearance of accurate family reminiscence. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is if you're going by the theory, right, that Mary was telling Luke these things, you think that when Mary would get it right? She would get the practice correct. Well, Luke doesn't, so there's that kind of suggests that Luke didn't listen to Mary, and Mary wasn't telling the story. You follow what I'm saying?